The most dangerous part of a toxic relationship isn't the betrayal. It's the moment you betray yourself to keep them. I remember sitting across from someone I loved, someone I trusted, and watching their eyes glaze over as I spoke. It wasn't what I said, it was simply that I was speaking it all. The sighs, the subtle eye rolls, the pauses that felt like thunder. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly something inside me started to shrink. I started second-guessing the words I wanted to say. I started editing my feelings before they could even find air. And then, the most dangerous thing happened. I started apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. For asking simple questions, for expressing joy, for needing comfort, for taking up space. I apologized for existing. I think many of us have been there, and the terrifying part is it feels so normal when you're inside it. You start believing you're the problem. You start thinking that if you could just be a little quieter, a little less needy, a little more agreeable, then maybe they'd love you the way you love them. But let's get honest. What you're really doing is abandoning yourself. Psychologists call this self-abandonment. It's when you make your own needs so small, so invisible, that you start believing you don't even deserve to have them. You hand over your boundaries like peace offerings just to keep the relationship alive. And it's subtle. See, toxic relationships don't often begin with bruises or screaming matches. They begin with you slowly disappearing. They begin when you stop speaking your truth because you're afraid of losing someone who makes you feel like you're too much. But you know what's even more heartbreaking? Sometimes you stay, not because you don't see the red flags, but because you're so afraid of being alone, you convince yourself those red flags can be painted white. You hope, you beg, you shrink. And here's what nobody tells you. When you constantly apologize for existing, you're not keeping the peace. You're waging a silent war against yourself. You don't have to beg someone to make space for you. The right person will want you to take up space. They'll invite your voice, not silence it. They'll meet your needs, not mock them. One day, you will realize that the version of you who kept apologizing wasn't weak. She was just trying to survive. But you don't have to survive that way anymore. You don't need to earn your right to exist. You already have it. And maybe the bravest thing you'll ever do is stop saying sorry for who you are. There's a moment, a quiet, sinking moment, when something inside you whispers, "This isn't right," and yet you stay. You tell yourself you're overthinking, that you're too sensitive, that maybe you're just expecting too much. You convince yourself to give it more time, to wait for things to get better, to be more understanding. I've lived that moment. I remember the nights I couldn't sleep, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't quite name. I felt a tightness in my chest, a heaviness in my stomach, a quiet panic that wouldn't let me go. And still, I silenced it. I buried it under excuses. They're just stressed. Maybe I'm the one overreacting. This is what love is supposed to feel like, isn't it? But the body always knows. Even when the mind fights it, even when your heart pleads for things to work out, your body keeps the score. It aches, it trembles, it withdraws. There's a deep wisdom living inside your gut, something psychologists call neuroception. Our body's innate ability to detect danger or safety before our brain can logically process it. It's why you feel unsettled even when everything seems fine on the surface. The body doesn't wait for the mind's permission to sound the alarm. I ignored that alarm for far too long. I excused the raised voices. I brushed aside the unpredictability. I tried to make myself comfortable in a place that never really felt safe. And that's the cruelty of toxic relationships. They don't always show their teeth right away. They wrap themselves in just enough affection to keep you questioning your own instincts. You rehearse your words carefully, walking on eggshells, wondering which version of them you'll get today. You monitor your own emotions so closely that you stop living and start performing. Your nervous system lives in a constant low-grade panic. You don't feel seen, you feel scanned, evaluated, managed. And yet you stay. Because the hardest thing to admit is that the person you love may not be the safe place you once believed. You cling to potential. You replay the good moments like a highlight reel, convincing yourself that those glimpses are the whole story. But love, real love, shouldn't require you to numb the signals your body is desperately sending. Love should feel like softness, like breathing, like peace. It should be where you exhale, not where you hold your breath. I've learned this the hard way. When your gut knows, listen. Because the cost of silencing your instincts is almost always your own emotional safety. You don't need a long list of evidence to trust your body's quiet knowing. You don't need to wait for it to get worse to give yourself permission to leave. Your gut is not the enemy of your love story. It's the guardian of it. If you have to silence yourself to stay, that's not love, that's survival. And you were made for more than surviving. You were made to feel safe, to feel chosen, to feel home. I remember the first time I felt small in someone else's presence. It wasn't because they yelled. It wasn't because they insulted me directly. It was subtle, almost quiet. I shared something I was proud of, something that had taken me courage to even attempt, and their response? A shrug, a smirk, a sentence that slipped out like it didn't matter. It's not that big of a deal. But to me, it was. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself they didn't mean it that way. I told myself I was being too sensitive. But as time went on, it happened again. And again. Moments that were important to me were met with dismissal, sarcasm, or indifference. Every time I felt proud, they would find a way to bring me back down. And slowly, without realizing it, I started sharing less. I started shrinking my wins before they could. I stopped bringing my full self to the relationship because somewhere deep inside, I started to believe that I was too much. That's the thing about toxic relationships. They don't always attack you loudly. Sometimes they just slowly chip away at your confidence until you barely remember who you were before you started making yourself small. Psychologists talk about this as covert emotional manipulation. It's not always the obvious cruelty, it's the small, repeated moments of invalidation that wear you down. It's the backhanded compliments, the subtle comparisons, the jokes that leave a sting. It's when you start adjusting yourself to protect them from your own success. You begin to believe that your brightness makes you unlovable. You start questioning your own worth. And then the worst part happens. You feel grateful they're still choosing you. You don't realize it, but you've started to outsource your self-worth to someone else. You hand it over like a fragile object, hoping they'll protect it, but they don't. They leave it out in the rain. And you know what? Sometimes it's easier to hold on to the idea of who they could be than to face the reality of who they consistently are. You tell yourself they're just having a bad day, they're under a lot of stress, they didn't mean it like that. But it's not just one day, it's not just one comment, it's a pattern. It's the pattern that breaks you. When someone chips away at your confidence piece by piece, they don't just take your joy, they start to rewrite the story you tell yourself about who you are. They make you question if your happiness is even valid, if your voice is too loud, if your dreams are too big. But here's the truth you don't hear often enough. You were never too much. They were simply not enough to hold what you carried. The right person will celebrate your wins like they are their own. They will protect your light, not dim it. They will hold your joy with care, not contempt. You should never feel guilty for being proud of yourself. You should never feel like you need to shrink to be loved. Your confidence is not negotiable. It's not up for dismantling. You don't owe anyone a quieter version of yourself just so they can feel bigger in your shadow. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to shine. And you are allowed to walk away from anyone who makes you believe otherwise. There's this ache that comes with remembering how someone used to love you. You hold on to those early days like a lifeline. The way they made you laugh, the tenderness in their eyes, the texts that made your whole body feel seen. You replay those memories like they're proof that what you have is real. You whisper to yourself, that's who they really are. They're just going through something. They'll come back to me. I just have to wait. I've sat in that waiting room. I've held on to the version of someone who no longer existed, if they ever really did. But here's the cruel thing about toxic relationships. Sometimes you're not in love with the person in front of you. You're in love with who they were at the beginning. It's a story that's painful to admit because it means facing a devastating truth. Maybe that version of them wasn't the truth. Maybe it was the hook. Maybe it was what psychologists call love bombing, when affection, attention, and intensity are poured on so quickly, so fully, that you become emotionally attached before you've even seen who they really are. I've heard people say, but I know their heart. And I want to say, gently, what if the heart you knew was just the part they wanted you to see? What if you're grieving someone who only ever existed in the beginning? You tell yourself you can fix it. You hang on, hoping they'll snap out of it, that they'll remember how they used to treat you, that you'll get back to the version where you felt safe, adored, chosen. But the hard truth? When someone shows you over and over again who they are now, you can't keep living in the echo of who they were then. The version you're waiting for may not be coming back. And you will break yourself into smaller and smaller pieces, trying to love them back to life. Psychology tells us we get addicted to potential. We chase the idea of who someone could be instead of accepting who they've become. And that addiction keeps us trapped. It keeps us explaining away their behavior, making excuses, lowering our standards, tolerating disrespect, because we are waiting for the moment when they go back to being the person who made us feel safe. But here's what no one tells you. Sometimes the beginning was the lie. Sometimes the beginning was the performance. I remember telling myself, I just need to be more patient. But patience without boundaries is self-destruction. Waiting for someone to change back while they keep hurting you is like holding on to a burning rope, hoping the fire will go out. It won't. There is grief in letting go of who you thought they were. There is grief in letting go of the story you were desperately trying to write. But there is also freedom. There is freedom in finally seeing what's in front of you instead of clinging to a fantasy. You don't have to be the one who waits forever. You don't have to prove you're loyal by tolerating pain. You don't have to keep choosing someone who keeps choosing to hurt you. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not staying. Sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from the version of them you made yourself believe would come back. It's not your job to save them, it's your job to save you. And it's okay to finally put down the story that's been breaking your heart. It's even when you finally walk away from a toxic relationship, there's this brutal confusion that settles in your bones. You think leaving should feel like freedom, but what it really feels like at first is grief. It feels like you've lost something. And you have. You've lost the version of yourself that tolerated the pain. The part people rarely talk about is how leaving isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the hardest chapter. Because now you have to sit with yourself. Now you have to unlearn all the ways you convinced yourself you were unworthy of more. Now you have to face the uncomfortable truth that, for a long time, you called survival love. It's terrifying to realize that what you were addicted to wasn't just them. It was the cycle, the highs and the lows, the approval and the withdrawal, the way they would tear you down and then swoop in to patch you up just enough to keep you tethered. Psychologists call this a trauma bond, an attachment that forms through repeated patterns of reward and pain. It's like your nervous system gets trapped on a roller coaster that keeps you hooked, even when you know it's not safe. Your body craves what it fears. Your heart misses what broke it. And when you finally break the cycle, you're not just walking away from a person, you're walking away from the version of yourself that thought you couldn't live without them. That's why it hurts so much. Because you're saying goodbye to the false safety of the familiar. You're saying goodbye to the part of you that believed this was all you were worth. But the real healing begins in that uncomfortable, empty space. It's the place where you slowly remember who you were before you started shrinking. It's where you start piecing yourself back together without waiting for someone else to give you permission. I remember sitting in my car one day, after I left, my hands were shaking, my chest was tight, and I sobbed. Not because I wanted to go back, but because I didn't know who I was without them. But that moment, that was the beginning. That was me finally coming home to myself. Healing from a toxic relationship isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's not about erasing the past or skipping over the heartbreak. It's about finally telling the truth about what you survived. It's about sitting in the grief long enough to honor the version of you who didn't know better yet. You don't have to hate them to heal. You don't have to erase the memories. But you do have to choose yourself now, over and over and over again. Even on the days when you miss them. Even on the days when the loneliness feels unbearable. Even when your mind replays the good times like a cruel movie reel. Because here's the thing. Loneliness after leaving is temporary. Losing yourself if you stay, that's permanent. I've learned that the courage to leave is only half the battle. The real bravery is staying gone. It's choosing to break the cycle not just once, but every day you wake up and remind yourself that you deserve a love that doesn't require you to bleed to keep it alive. You survived loving the wrong person, now you have to survive loving yourself. And you will. Slowly, quietly, fiercely. You will. You don't owe your loyalty to someone who kept showing you their love was conditional. You owe yourself the chance to be whole again. You are not too much. You are not too sensitive. You are not hard to love. You've just been offering your softness to the wrong hands.